Shalom, Havarim. Hello, friends. It's good to be with you on this, the first Sunday of Lent 2021. And we're going to be doing something different for Lent this year, and we are going to not be beginning our sermons with a joke. Now, I know that's disappointing to many of you, but don't worry, we're going to make it up later. In Lent, we're going to give up the telling of the opening joke for the next couple of weeks. But we will make that up on what is sometimes referred to as Holy Humor Sunday. All right, Holy Humor Sunday, sometimes called Bright Sunday, is the Sunday immediately following Easter. It's meant to be a time of joking and levity. And the idea behind it is that we just came through this season and we need a little levity, we need a little laughter. But it's also the idea that God has just played the biggest joke on the devil. God has just pulled the old switcheroo, and there's been this huge joke where everything looked like the devil had won. God turns the tables and says, "Ha ha, the joke's on you." So however you want to think about that, we're going to try that out this year. I think we are going to need some extra humor. So I'm going to be inviting you to send me your jokes. I'll be keeping a few for myself. And we'll try to work in as many jokes as we can on that the first Sunday after Easter. Now, I keep saying the word Lent, and I know many of you did not grow up observing Lent. I did not grow up observing Lent either. And often we think of Lent as this time when you give up something. And many people do. They give up something like chocolate or meat or soda for the 40 days of Lent. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, giving up or even adding something to your life for 40 days. This is not a requirement in the Mennonite Church, but I just want to say if you find this helpful, by all means, practice Lent in this way. Go for it. But if you don't, just live into it in whatever way you find most helpful. So people wonder, why 40 days? And the reason behind it, one way to answer that question is just to say, I don't know. Why 40? Why is 40 such an important number in the Bible? There are 40 years that the Israelites wander in the wilderness after they leave Egypt. When Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, he's there for 40 days receiving the Torah. On the ark, the story we're going to talk about later here, Noah and his family experienced 40 days and 40 nights of rain. And the story that's kind of the quintessential story of Lent is Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, fasting and praying for 40 days. So why 40 days? I don't know, but 40 seems to be an important number in the Bible. So Lent is generally this giving up something for 40 days as we try to remember all that God through Jesus has given up for us. It's a way to help us remember what God has done for us. All right, so today's Old Testament passage is the one I'm going to focus on. And all the passages from the Old Testament during the period of Lent this year focus on different covenants with God. Now, a covenant is a promise. It's a commitment, and it's not something that we use. That word we use a lot today. It's somewhat like a contract. It's kind of an agreement. And closest thing that we have today would be a marriage covenant. And I even need to differentiate a few different aspects of a marriage covenant to help us better understand, because there's actually two parts of a marriage covenant. There's that civil part, and then there's a religious part. The civil part is the part where you have to go down to the courthouse and you get this marriage license, this agreement. Each person signs it. You may have to have a witness sign it. The person doing the procedure, the ceremony, has to sign it as well. That's all legal. It says, hey, we are going to share our lives and share our money, share our resources. It's very, strictly legal. But then there's the religious part. And this isn't necessary in the United States, but within the church, the way we do it as we gather friends and family, people who are important to us, and we stand before God and our friends and our family in the church, and we vow to love, honor, and serve one another for as long as we both shall live. There's the legal part of it, then there's this covenant part. So in these passages that we'll be looking at over the next few weeks, we're focusing on this covenantal agreement, this agreement between us and another person perhaps, and always with God. That's what differentiates between a covenant and a contract. God is also one of the actors, one of the participants in that agreement. So today's covenant comes to us from Genesis chapter 9. This is sometimes referred to as God's covenant with Noah. And it is indeed that, but I would also say that it's so much more. I'm going to read to you Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. These three verses really just show how expansive this covenant is, this agreement between God and others. It says beginning in verse 8, "Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him," this is after the flood, "I now establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." So if you read the whole story about Noah, you find that God is very disappointed in humanity. You know, we're just 9 chapters into the book of Genesis. This is very early on, and it didn't take us long to mess up. We have sinned, I use that inclusively. We have sinned and fallen short of what God has expected of us. And God's method for dealing with evil early on is to just wipe it all out and start over again. God decides to select one person, the most righteous person he can find, and that's Noah. We'll find out later he wasn't perfect. But the most righteous person he could find was Noah. And he told Noah and his family to build this ark and gather 2 of every kind of animal, and they go to this ark, and then God just wiped out everything else and said, "Let's start all over." Now in this covenant that God is making, not only with Noah, but also with all of the animals, all of creation, God's making this promise that he will never do it this way again. This is no longer how God is going to deal with evil. God's not going to wipe it out by sending down rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Rather than destroying creation, God will now love us into redemption. Did you catch that? I'm going to say it one more time. Rather than destroying evil, including evil people, God now chooses to love us into redemption. And that's the story that unfolds through the rest of the Bible, God loving us into redemption. We're going to keep coming back to that time and time again. Now, God gives Noah a sign. And depending on the version, the translation you use, it may say a slightly different word, but quite literally the word that says that it's used there in the Hebrew is that God puts a bow in the sky, his bow in the sky, it says. Some translations will say rainbow, but just in the very literal Hebrew, it says God will place his bow in the sky. And there's so much symbolism there. And I love this symbolism. It's always this reminder of what God has promised to do, or even more importantly, what not to do. And I love these stories with symbolism. I even think of like the story of how, why do we greet people with a handshake? Sorry, why did we used to greet people with a handshake? Way back before COVID, which now seems like a strange thing. You don't touch people when you come up to them. But why did we once do that? Why was that the practice? And one of the reasons that people often give for that is with so many people being right-handed. I think it's like 90% of the population is right-handed. When you approach another person and you stick out your right hand and offer that to them, you are showing them that you are not holding any weapons. You are not there to attack them. You come in peace. So this idea of God putting his bow in the sky, there's also stories of how when there's two different warring tribes or factions or groups, whenever they would meet together for peace talks, when they would come together and not have any intention of hurting each other, one thing that they would do to show their intentions or to meet peacefully would be to take their bows. And remember, I'm not talking like a hair bow or a bow you put on a present. This is a bow like a bow and arrow. They would take their bows and they would climb up in the trees and hang them in the branches. They would hang them out of reach so that it was obvious to the other person when they came into this meeting place. They'd see these bows up in the tree. They know that this other tribe meant them no harm. They were meeting in peace. They desired to work things out, not through violence, not through killing, not through eliminating the competition. They wanted to work it out peacefully. So the scriptures tell us that God placed his bow in the sky as a sign to all of Noah's descendants, as well as to all the animals of the world, that never again would he wipe out the world in that way. He was not going to deal with evil through destruction. And we find out he's going to deal with evil through love. Rather than sending down rain, God would send down the sun. Rather than sending down floods, God would send down his only Son. Now, some sermons, when I write them, I write them with an intention of trying to teach you something about yourself. How should we live? How should we act? How should we interact with one another? This isn't that kind of sermon. This is a sermon that teaches us about who God is. Our God is the kind of God who has made this promise not to send down the rain, but to send down his Son. Our God is a God who loves us into redemption. So what does that mean? Okay, so here again we are at the beginning of Lent, this 40-day period where we are kind of mirroring Jesus' time in the wilderness where he fasted and prayed for 40 days. When we talk about Lent, we talk about how Jesus is beginning his journey to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place where Jesus would be killed on the cross. And he knew as he was heading to Jerusalem exactly what was going to happen to him. Even his disciples knew, if you go to Jerusalem, you will be killed. They will crucify you if you go in there. And Jesus still says, this is what I've got to do. So Lent marks this beginning of the journey. And along the way, on this journey to Jerusalem, Jesus will meet people who are misrepresenting who God is. People who believe that all God cares about is following the rules. And Jesus calls them out on that. He confronts them and says, no, indeed, God cares about rules, but God is a loving God who offers forgiveness and grace. Along the way, Jesus will meet with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes, people that have been told that they are second ranked or lower on the totem pole than everybody else. And what does Jesus do? He sits with them. He eats with them. He even tells one tax collector, Zacchaeus, he said, I'm coming to your house today. He's saying, you are still loved. You've made some mistakes, but you are still loved. Along the way, Jesus challenged those who were wealthy to give money to the poor. Along the way, Jesus challenges those who are powerful to help those who are weak. And Jesus knows, calling out the powerful, the wealthy, the leaders, and sitting with these sinners, he knows that doing this will lead to his death, because you don't mess with the status quo. But Jesus loved these people. He loved them even to his death on the cross. And that's what happens when you love people the way Jesus loved them. As Jesus is entering into Jerusalem, these are his words from Matthew's gospel. Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus didn't come to destroy the world through a flood or a famine, through violence or warfare. He came to redeem us through love. Love that ultimately ended in his death on a cross. And I shouldn't say ultimately ended there because we know there's more to the story. That bow that was in the sky, the cross that stood on Golgotha, these are symbols of death, symbols of suffering and pain. But they're also symbols of new life in Christ. As winter gives way to spring, we will see more and more rain. April showers bring May flowers. We know that. And with some of those rain showers, we will see God's bow in the sky. A reminder that God does not seek to redeem the world by wiping it out and starting over again. No, God loves us into redemption, even if it comes at the cost of a cross. All right, my friends, however you choose to spend these next 40 days, I pray that it is a time that you can come closer to God. And for those of you who are giving something up for 40 days, please know that I am on your side. Know that you are stronger than you even are aware. And my friends, we've been giving up things like restaurants and movies and social gatherings now for 365 days. I know you can do it for another 40. Blessings to you all, and we'll check back with you in a week.